Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Bryce. Welcome to Cross Culture, where we engage culture with Christ by answering culture's biggest questions and problems from a biblical perspective. We want to let the gospel be a voice within culture in order to transform culture into kingdom culture. Today, this is part 2 of biblical stories with deeper meaning. And so last time we talked about the story of Jonah, and we talked about the story of Joseph. And today we're going to talk about 2 new stories. Justin is back on the podcast, and we're going to be talking specifically about the story of Absalom and the story of Jesus and Jesus Barabbas.
The next one I have is the story of Absalom.
Absalom. Man, that's one. I don't know if I think a lot of people hear about the story of Jonah. A lot of people have probably heard about the story of Joseph and the interpreting of dreams. A lot of people, this might be one that not as many people have heard of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me pull this up. This is in what, 2 Kings?
2 Samuel.
2 Samuel,
starting in chapter 13.
Okay.
And so, yeah, chapter 13, it really lays the groundwork for this story, because we see that David has a son named Amnon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has a half-brother named Absalom. And Absalom
Complicated family dynamic.
Yeah. And Absalom, he has a full sister named Tamar. And Amnon, their half-brother, he loves Tamar. And he loves Tamar, but he knows that he can't have her. And he basically has this friend who tells him, like, hey, you're a prince of David, take what you want. And so he has David he has David tell his sister to bring him food. And while his sister brings him food, he violates his sister. And
terrible story. It's a terribly sad story.
Yeah,
really.
yeah, absolutely. And then, even after that, he says that after Amnon had her, he hated her. And,
so yeah, he violates her, but he still didn't get what he wanted.
Yeah.
He wanted a relationship, right? But that's obviously not going to give him the relationship. So of course he's not. Yeah. Wow.
And then
it's terrible.
Yeah, Absalom finds out about this, and it's interesting. It says that Absalom, 2 whole years passed from when Amnon violated Tamar to when Absalom finally, gets his vengeance. He's been plotting this for 2 whole years, and he basically tells his father, King David, hey, let's all go to the mountains. I have sheep shears up in the mountains, which is basically an old way of saying, hey, I got a place up in the mountains. Let's go get away for a little bit. And David says, no, we can't all go. And he says, well, at least have my brother Amnon come with me. And so Absalom, he goes into the mountains with Amnon, and he tells his servants to kill him, to kill his half brother. And they do. And ultimately, I think that just from right there, it's an act that I think that reading it, we might think is justified, right? I think I think that Absalom
had a righteous anger.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely
sister was violated. Yeah.
Yeah, I would. I don't know.
There's a train in the background. Yeah, if you hear a train, there's a train going on right outside. It's all good.
If something like that happened to me, I would be very angry. It would be hard to stop myself from doing something very similar.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
In this situation, there's a part of me that absolutely understands Absalom's actions. So I think there is an important part on. It's important for us to be able to distinguish that although what he did, it's nuanced. It might not be the right response. His anger was, I would say, was a righteous anger.
Yeah.
That's something that that is something that makes God angry also.
Yeah. And then, word gets back to David that Amnon is dead, and it all gets revealed, what Amnon did to Tamar.
Yeah, what a mess.
And it even says, Absalom had fled, and David mourned for his son every day. And he had fled to Geshur for 3 years, but and the heart of King David longed to go out to Absalom, for he was comforted regarding Amnon since he was dead. So David was even comforted that Amnon was dead, because he found out that what Amnon had done to Tamar, and he really just missed Absalom, because he known that Absalom, he did what he did out of kind of he wanted justice, right?
Yeah, he wanted justice, and it seems like David even feels tender for Absalom.
Yeah,
and wants him to know that.
We see that David, he doesn't even he misses Absalom. He doesn't want to punish Absalom. He doesn't want to exile Absalom. But David has to be just, right? He's king. He can't.
And this is King David. This is what a broken family dynamic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
Wow.
yeah, so he Absalom returns. Basically, Joab, David's general, he gets like a woman to go basically tell David like, why won't you bring your son Absalom back? And he says, okay, like we can bring him back. And he said he still has to be just though, because he's the king. And he says Absalom can return, but he cannot see my face.
Mm.
And so Absalom, he returns to the kingdom, and Absalom is this guy, and he really gets off easy, right? He did, like, at the end of the day, he murdered a prince of David. you know,
Did.
and David says, okay, you can come back. The only requirement is that you can't see my face. You can't live like a prince anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Absalom, it's not enough for him. He calls for Joab. Joab does not come. So he tells his servants to set Joab's field on fire, and
Mm.
he sets it on fire. Joab's like, why'd you set my field on fire? And Absalom, he starts to use sympathy to get what he really wants. And he basically says, if I can't see my dad, I'd rather just be banished, and tell my dad to see me. And if he thinks that there is any impurity in my heart, he can kill me right there.
So he's doing this out of spite.
Yeah.
He's like angry that he's not getting what he wants. So
Yeah.
out of spite, he's going to go and prove that if I can't get what I want, I'm gonna do this. Yeah.
Yeah. So he basically says, yeah, take me to my dad, and if my dad sees that there's any impurity in my heart, he can kill me. And when he sees David, David kisses him and he forgives him. And now after that, you start to see Absalom. He returns to like his authority as a prince, and he basically starts, judging, looking over David's kingdom. And it says that Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And like a lot of these people, they started to follow Absalom. They're like, I would rather follow Absalom than follow David. And he basically starts to plot this uprising against his father. And
I mean, yeah. Like, so it started with his brother, and now, yeah.
And then, in chapter 15, in verse 13, it says, then a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. So then David said to Ittai, go and cross over the brook Kidron. And so basically, and they flee into the wilderness.
Yep.
And I think this is really interesting too. If you get farther down in verse 25, it said, and the king said to Zadok, return the ark to the city. If I find favor in the sight of the Lord, then he will bring me back and show me both it and his habitation. But if he says, I have no delight in you, then here I am. Let him do to me as seems good to him. So they're fleeing the palace, right? They're fleeing into the woods, and they stop to grab the Ark of the Covenant. And David says, no, leave it. If God wants me back here, he will return me back here. And that was like, when I read that, I was like, wow, like that is crazy.
That is super. The integrity of David in that situation, I think, to trust God in light of that.
Yeah.
You could view the Ark of the Covenant as the source of power, in which if we grab this will give us an advantage because God is with us and all of that. And yet David's mind, God is the one with the power, because the Ark of the Covenant represents his presence. It's not the actual Ark of the Covenant, the artifact. It's God, and he believes that if it's God's will, then he'll be back at that location. I think that's really significant.
Yeah, and so like they flee into the woods. We see Absalom. Absalom enters Jerusalem. He basically he trashes the palace. He starts taking some of his father's concubines as his own, and he basically says like, hey, like the only way to finish this is we got to kill my father. We got to kill David.
David's lived a messy life, man.
Yeah, and then we see David. He prepares his armies for battle, but he tells his generals like, hey, please save Absalom if you can. And I think that throughout this, after all this, like Absalom, he killed his brother. David brings him back into the kingdom, and then Absalom betrays him. And even after all of this, David says, please, if you can, just spare Absalom.
Wow.
And I think that there's really there might be nobody else in the Bible that knows forgiveness as well as David does. Like maybe Paul, but maybe Paul, but
he understood forgiveness. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. But like after all of that, to tell them like, please just don't kill my son.
Wow. It's almost like Saul, Saul had this venom towards David. He's tried to kill him multiple times. Yeah. And then David's given the opportunity to kill Saul, and he doesn't, and he spares his life. And when they ask him like why he does that, he's like, I'm not going to lay my hand on God's anointed, you know?
Yeah.
So I think David had this relationship with God in which he's been forgiven much. And I think that shows in really this whole story, the tenderness of David and his forgiveness despite betrayal, which is really, it points to Jesus in such a significant way.
Yeah, yeah. And chapter 18, I think, is really, the culmination of the entire story. And, like he says, deal gently with the young man, Absalom, for my sake. Like, he tells him to spare Absalom. And they took to the forest, they did battle. And it says there was a slaughter that day of 20,000 men.
Wow.
There's a huge battle. And it says, now Absalom encountered the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the branches of a massive oak. And then his head, who caught firmly in the oak, and he was left hanging between the sky and the earth, while the mule that was under him kept running. And ultimately, like, the thing that Absalom loved so much, like, we didn't mention it, but earlier in the story, like, it says Absalom was like the most beautiful man, most handsome man in all of Israel. Everybody loved him, and he loved his hair.
He looked
like,
the part.
Yeah, he had this long hair that they braided, and ultimately that hair gets him stuck in a tree and leaves him hanging there. And it says, when a certain when a certain man saw him, he informed Joab and said, "Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." And then Joab said to the man who had informed him, behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? It would have been my duty to give to you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, even if I were to receive 10,000, or even if I were to receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not put my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you, protect the young man Absalom from me. And so, like,
Wow.
Joab at this point, like, Joab was Absalom's friend, but at this point, he's fed up with Absalom. He burned his field. He's, betraying King David. And so Joab's like, why didn't you kill him? You saw Absalom there. And he says, I don't care if you offer me 1,000 pieces of silver. I would not touch a son of David.
Yeah, which is like, that's David's mentality and attitude towards God's anointed. And it's very clear that that's the same attitude that he's instilled in his army, in his people, in the people he leads. Like, it's not just David leading with that mindset. He's instilled that mindset even to the people who are following him in this battle.
Yeah.
They easily could have taken Absalom and killed him in that moment. I mean, that's his most vulnerable moment. And yet, I think they have a dignity. They show a dignity to Absalom despite all of the different things he's done. They show a dignity to him that says he's still the son of the one we serve and the one we follow.
Yeah. And, ultimately, like, Joab goes back, and, Joab's the one to kill him. He thrusts 3 spears through the heart of Absalom. And it says they threw him into a deep pit in the forest. They, threw large pile of stones over him, buried him.
Overkill.
Yeah. But this next verse, I think, is very interesting. In verse 18, it says, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken up and set up for himself a memorial stone, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to continue my name. So he named the memorial stone after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. And, that's one thing that, like, I look at, and, Absalom, all these people, they leave a legacy, right? And what's Absalom's legacy? Absalom is a guy who, let his pride, let his ambition, lead him to leading a revolt against his dad. He tries to kill his dad. And ultimately, what does he have at the end? He has a rock. He names a rock after himself. He has no son to continue his name. And, that's ultimately, that's the wages. Paul says, the wages of sin is death. And ultimately, Absalom dies, and he has nothing left. And, we see that, the word gets back to David, and he says, the messenger comes to him, let the Lord receive good news. The Lord has freed you this day from the handful of those who rose up against you. And the king said to the Cushite, is it well with the young man Absalom? And the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rose up against him be like that man. And the king trembled and went to his chamber over the gate and wept. And this is what he said as he walked. My son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son. And, even after all that, after everything that happened, David wishes that he would have died instead of his son. Even though his son tried to take his kingdom from him, tried to kill him, he says, if only I had died instead of you.
Wow. So in David's response, I think we see really the heart of the Father, right? That he would rather be the one he would rather his death be the case than our death. And so Jesus has given his life. David didn't have that opportunity to give his life so that his son could live, or so that he could keep as many sons as possible. But Jesus did give his life to gain as many sons as possible. And I think when I hear this overarching story, there's this theme of vengeance. There's this theme of retaliation and righteous anger. I think Absalom had a righteous anger.
Yeah.
But I think his method was revenge.
Yeah, I think the story, it absolutely starts out. I think everybody can agree that, even what Absalom did to Amnon was justified. Like, I think nobody could really, blame Absalom for doing that.
Like, we can understand his actions.
At the end of the day, though, sins still have consequences. And he was exiled. He ends up getting forgiven of that. He gets let off easy, and he gets to return home. And basically, they just say you can't live like a prince anymore. But that's not enough for him. And even though he did that, justified act and was punished for it and even forgiven, we see that his pride and his ambition says, no, that's not enough for me. I need more. And when you look at that and just like the overarching story of, justice versus vengeance and forgiveness and grief, it's a very, complex story, and I think it's heartbreaking to see David's love for his son, even though his son had done all that to him.
It is heartbreaking. And I do think that balance, or that line between justice and vengeance, forgiveness and grief, I think that's really good. And the Bible, I think, is really interesting in that a lot of the times we make it super black and white, but it's more nuanced than that. Like, with Absalom, he did a sinful thing in response out of a righteous anger to a sinful thing. And so we see this messy family. And really, this story gives me hope, too, to know that's like, wow, God worked so much through David and his entire family, and yet this is his family. This is like his family story. David did not have some perfect life, and yet his heart for God being revealed in Scripture shows me that I need to have hope to know that God can work in me and through me despite whatever mess my life looks like.
Yeah, I think it just shows the type of man that King David was, because he knew that, David had fallen many times in his life, specifically with like Bathsheba. And, like David probably looked at Absalom, and, even though Absalom, murdered his brother, it was a justified act. David knows that, he killed Uriah in an unjustified
exactly.
act. He wanted Uriah's wife, and he murdered him. And, David knows that he was forgiven for that. And so, he knows that, I'm sure that was like running through his mind, him wanting to forgive his son Absalom for that, because he knows the type of forgiveness that God had for him. And, just like, even through the very end, he says, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you.
It's like when Jesus is talking to Peter about how many times he should forgive.
Yeah.
And I think, let me find this real quick. This is in Matthew 18, 21 through 22. Peter came up to him and said, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Or 70 times 7. So it's amazing. Jesus is emphasizing, I think, 2 truths in this. One, we shouldn't ever count on our brother to stop sinning against us. In other words, I think if I have an expectation in my head that I'm going to cease to be sinned against, I'm setting myself up for a false reality. The reality is I'm going to continue to be sinned against by people I don't know, by people I do know, by people I even consider my brother. And it's not a question of, well, how many times have they sinned against me? It's a question of, am I willing to forgive as I've been forgiven? Because is there ever a time in this side of life in which I'm going to stop struggling with sin in some way, shape, or form, or ever be without sin entirely? No, not at all. I mean, John tells us anybody who claims to be without sin deceives himself, but when we do sin, we have an advocate. So I think as Christians, I need to have the heart of David, the heart of one who knows their own forgiveness, and the heart of one who is willing to forgive much because they've been forgiven much. Man, that's a sad story, though. Really,
yeah, absolutely.
It really is. I think the Bible also is not just full of fun and easy, happy ending stories. I mean, it's a very sad and broken narrative.
And it's a very easy one to miss too. You know, like I remember, like, you know, when I was reading through the Bible for the first time, it's just, you know, it's something that you just brush over, like, oh, you know, he tried to start an uprising against David, he got killed for his trouble, and
it's easy. Like, just summarize it in that, right?
Yeah,
but it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, like the amount of times, like David knew how many times he was forgiven, and you know, he might have felt like there's nothing that Absalom has done that was as worse as what he did.
It's easy to be mindful of how people have sinned against you and how you've been wronged, but it's harder to be mindful of how you've wronged others and sinned as well. Yeah. And I think when we keep our own sin in the forefront of our minds, it actually enables us to be forgiving people, to be people who forgive well. So, man, awesome. Anything else you want to share on that one before jumping to the last one?
Yeah, no, I just think that, you know, like there's going to be times in your life where, you know, people wrong you, people are mean to you. And the ultimate thing is that, you know, God has forgiven you for everything that you've done. And ultimately, if you can, you got to find it in your heart to forgive people. I mean, it says it in the Lord's Prayer, forgive me my trespasses as I forgive those who trespass against me. You know?
Yeah. And for me, I think also it challenges me to let go of vengeance. Yeah. I might be righteously angry about something, but I can trust that God's justice is more sufficient than my vengeance.
Absolutely.
It reminds me of when Moses has a righteous anger towards the slave master who's beating the Hebrew, and he kills him, right? But then he flees. Not always the right response on our part, but God goes to Moses and uses Moses to free his people. So God understood the heart of Moses in that. He has the same righteous anger. So not trusting my own response and vengeance and retaliation, but God's justice. The last story that we wanted to jump into is the story of Jesus on trial, and he's before the people and before the authorities, and they are given the choice of choosing him or Barabbas. Him or Barabbas. And so this is in Matthew chapter 27. It's really in all the Gospels. It includes it in all the Gospels. But really, I think Matthew 27, 15 through 26 really show it the best. And so just real quick, what do you know about this story? Like, what do you know about the name Barabbas?
Yeah. So I know that, like, you know, when Jesus is put on trial, and, you know, it's basically an unfair trial. It's, you know, he's going to die. But, you know, Pontius Pilate, he has like a little, you know, one-on-one with Jesus, and he says, like, you know, I can find no sin in this man. And ultimately, he basically goes back to the crowd and he says, like, hey, you know, we release a prisoner every year. Who do you want me to release to you, Jesus or Barabbas? And they say, give us Barabbas.
Give us Barabbas. And so that's really what it is. So Jesus, being on trial illegally, he's standing before Pilate. Doesn't even want this problem. You know, Pilate doesn't want to kill Jesus. So Pilate is thinking, okay, let me do something. He actually initiated something a few years prior to where they could do this, where they could actually swap out someone as a prisoner for someone on trial if that's what the people wanted, to avoid some type of insurrection or riot. And so it's interesting. Most texts will say just Barabbas, right? But really, his name is not just Barabbas. Barabbas is part of his name, but his name is actually Jesus Barabbas. So you have Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God, and then you have Jesus Barabbas. And what do we know about Barabbas? Jesus Barabbas. He was an insurrectionist. I mean, he was a murderer.
Yeah.
He was put in prison for a legitimate reason. What do we know about Jesus of Nazareth? Again, innocent. Innocent. So I think what's amazing here is Barabbas, the word Barabbas, his name, it means son of the Father. So when Pilate asks the crowd, who do you choose? And they're really chanting Jesus Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas. They're saying son of the Father, son of the Father, son of the Father. And this isn't one where we have to read a lot and go into a lot of stories, but I think it's so interesting here. You see two sons of the Father. In the crowd, mankind is given the choice of choosing which one do you choose. And they choose Jesus Barabbas, son of the Father. And they condemn Jesus the Nazarene, son of the Father. And I think it highlights, remember when Jesus tells the Pharisees that their father is Satan because they lie like their father. And really, I think what this story highlights is that we as mankind, humans, we as people have the choice of either following the father of this world, Satan, or the Father of heaven, Yahweh. And Jesus shows us the way to serving the true Father. And Barabbas shows us the way to serving this earthly father. And so I think it's really fascinating. You have two pictures of almost like a Messiah. Barabbas is the people's Messiah, and Jesus is the true Messiah. Yeah. And so I think we're left with that same question every day. Every day we're left with the question, which do we choose? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, the Son of God? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, it honestly reminds me of the first story that we looked at, the story of Jonah. Like, these people are Jonah, and like, we know that Jesus was completely innocent, but these people, they had prejudice against him. They said, no, we don't want Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth, he threatens our power. We don't want him. Give us Jesus Barabbas.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Like, Jesus is like, when you read this story, Jesus is this scapegoat. He's the scapegoat. That's like what this is. He is the out here. He's the one in which they could put all the blame on and all the punishment on. And that's what it is. In Leviticus 16, that's what the scapegoat is. I mean, in the Levitical sacrificial system, what do we see from the scapegoat? The scapegoat would bear the sins of Israel, and they would send it out of the camp. And that's exactly what's happening here when they're shouting, crucify him, crucify him. They want Barabbas, he's already been sentenced, but yet they want to put and impute the guilt of him onto Jesus. And really, Barabbas is us.
Yeah.
Barabbas is us. Like, imagine Barabbas's world too. He's in prison. He's on trial for death. I mean, he's an insurrectionist and a murderer, so he's going to die. And imagine you're in this prison, and maybe the people are out in the streets, and this trial is going on, and you hear, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Imagine what he's thinking. And then the guards come and get him. He's thinking, I'm dying. And then he's literally let free. He's like let free, and he looks, and it's Jesus, the Son of the Father, who takes his place. I wish we had like a sequel almost to like Jesus Barabbas's story. Like, what happens after this with him after receiving the substitute of Jesus? Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's just crazy. They hand him over to the Romans to be crucified, and like, Pilate, like, he says like why? Like, what evil has this man done? Yeah, they keep on shouting, crucify him.
I mean, Yeah, when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, right? So, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it that yourselves. And then all the people said, this is the scapegoat part from Leviticus 16 that it connects to. And all the people said, his blood shall be on us and our children. Then he released Barabbas for them. But after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. So they are fully satisfied with taking all of the accountability and responsibility for this. They are willing to co-sign this because they believe Jesus is guilty and should die. And so, I mean, man, from Jonah to Joseph to Absalom to Barabbas, what are some of the final things that you want to kind of like encourage when you think of Jonah? What's one final thing you want to encourage people to be mindful?
Yeah,
of?
one final thing. Yeah, just with Jonah specifically. Yeah, just be mindful of the people around you. Like there's so many people that are ready to follow God and come to God, and why not you show them the way? Why not you spread the message to them?
Yeah, I love that. And with Joseph, if I can encourage anybody for anything, it's be mindful that there's life in the blood of Jesus and that Jesus had to die. His body was sacrificed. He gave his life for you so that you could have life. And like the two thieves on the cross, they could do nothing for their own salvation. And yet the thief that saw Jesus in paradise was because he concluded that Jesus was who he said he was. And so Jesus' blood and his body are sufficient for our salvation. We should respond to that. And then what about one last thing for Absalom? What would you encourage people?
Yeah, with Absalom, I would just say that there's going to be many times in our life where we fall, and just to realize that there's a difference between justice and vengeance, and we all want justice, but not to take vengeance into our own hands. Vengeance is the Lord's. And ultimately, when something like that happens to you, if somebody does, rise up against you, betray you, take vengeance out on you, forgive them.
Forgiveness and justice, yeah. And then with the story of Jesus, the Son of God, and Jesus Barabbas, all of us have a choice. I have a choice. You have a choice. Who will we choose each day? Will it be Jesus, the Son of God, or will it be Jesus, the Son of the Father of this world? And the way we live, the way we think, the way we treat people is all reflected and reflective of that choice. And so choose wisely. And if you haven't chosen Jesus to be your Lord and Savior, what's stopping you from doing that? If you live in the Terre Haute, Indiana area and you want to study about who Jesus is, if you want to hear about salvation, or even if you're not in this area and you want to study, just reach out to us. Please contact us. We would love to meet with you and talk with you and just hear your story. If you need to get connected to a safe and biblically sound church, please reach out to us. We want to help connect you to a local congregation that can help nourish you in your relationship with God. And again, we encourage you to go back and read all of these stories on your own time. You will get so much out of them with your time with Jesus and God's word, far more than what you'll ever get from us on a podcast. But if you're watching this video, thank you for watching. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend. Maybe share it with a non-believing friend or even a believing friend. It's a great opportunity to maybe show them some of the connections behind biblical stories that they've maybe heard or maybe have never heard before. But again, thank you for watching. Welcome to 2026. We're excited for the new year. And until the next time, God bless.